So by way of introduction, and Professor Robert Liu has a very, very long CV. So I cut it down to Rob is a Harvard professor, faculty director of the Harvard Ed Portal, and UNESCO chair on life sciences and social innovation. What I really enjoy about Rob is he's passionate about education and Africa. And if I have it correct, you have been here 5 times to South Africa. And what I also enjoy is Rob coined the following phrase recently. He said, "We often say that Africa needs online learning, but just as importantly, I'd say that online learning needs Africa." So I am excited to start today with an internationally acclaimed leader such as Rob. And so, Rob, thank you. Over to you. You have 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. As Peter pointed out, I have been coming to South Africa for a few years now. And I have to say, one of the things I found so exciting is that, as Peter mentioned, we often think that, and I think it's true, that in terms of learning at scale, working with the internet, working with digital assets and digital modalities is absolutely crucial. And we tend to focus on the fact that in a place like Africa, where your exploding population of youth that are so talented, but that perhaps have less access to education, is a huge opportunity for online learning. But I think what's also clear is that online learning today, in some ways, is somewhat limited and constrained by those that are creating the content, those that are telling the stories. And so my point, in terms of the statement that Peter shared with you, is that the stories that are coming out of Africa, the perspectives, the contexts, the cases are in fact crucially important, and those should be shared with the world more broadly. So I've spent a number of years, in particular, in the massive open online course world, in the MOOC world. And in 2012, when I founded HarvardX and was part of the founding of the platform that I think many of you know as edX, what we were focusing on were creating courses that we could share with the world, broadcast out to the world. But very quickly, what we realized is that that's simply not enough. And that while it's true that in 2012 and 2013, there was a lot of talk about, the disruption of universities, of schools, that these online MOOC platforms would create. And now, when we fast forward 6 years later, 7 years later, some folks might ask, well, what happened to that disruption? Well, in fact, the disruption is happening. It is just happening more slowly, which frankly, we should have known from the very beginning would be the case. But the point I'd like to make today is that maybe disruption is not the right word, because disruption has a slightly destructive sort of a connotation to it. And I think a better way of thinking about things is, how can what we're learning from the MOOC world really allow us to understand how do we take learning forward at scale for many more individuals? And I think what is also accelerating that understanding for many of us is what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic. Because for so many universities and schools that were a little bit resistant, a little bit hesitant about online learning, COVID-19 has forced those schools to engage with it. Now, sadly enough, the majority, including my own institution, weren't really well equipped to do so across the entire curriculum. But that being said, we are really fighting hard right now to figure out what is the right balance. And to me, that is what is truly exciting. Because what we've learned is that if you think about what a student of any kind needs to do to learn, you can really think about it in 2 domains, if you will. There's what that student can do in their own time, self-paced, and what we often think of as asynchronously. And so now is the moment where we can really look at online learning experiences that are interactive, but nevertheless are done asynchronously and are self-paced. And what we're learning is that those kinds of experiences are perfect for the kind of learning that's more introductory, that's more foundational. If you think about it as sort of the basic facts, the basic concepts of a field, the basic fundamental skills that you might need, self-paced online learning is perfect for that. But then what is face-to-face or live synchronous learning good for? And what we know is that if you're face-to-face with someone, be it in Zoom, perhaps, or Microsoft Teams, or be it in the classroom, what you really should be focusing on is problem solving, teamwork, engagement, the sorts of things where the real-time back and forth is absolutely crucial. And so I think we have an enormous opportunity right now to really think about how asynchronous online and still interactive materials can dovetail perfectly with synchronous face-to-face sort of interactions, be it virtually or be it in the classroom. This sort of dynamic is what we often think of as the flipped classroom, which I'm sure many of you have heard of and have perhaps tried. But what we are seeing is that the flipped classroom has not worked as well as we'd like, partly because we haven't really figured out that balance yet in between how you blend the digital and the asynchronous with the live synchronous. And so I think right now we have a unique kind of opportunity to do this. And there are a whole host of different experiments out there that are being done right now. And I would say that this summer and in the fall, we're going to see an explosion of possibilities in terms of how people and schools and institutions blend those two things. So one way in which this is being done, and at Harvard, we're pushing very hard to do this, and it actually has some relevance to thinking about that first point that I made, that in fact, the stories, the contexts of Africa should be shared more widely with the world, is that if our students are online, what we should think about is what can those students bring to the table based on where they are. So right now, for example, in my Harvard class, I have students scattered around the world. And instead of just thinking about ways in which I'm broadcasting learning to them, another thing that we can do is empower those students to bring into the virtual classroom what their perspectives are from where they are. And what we're seeing is an opportunity where, for the first time, the fact that students are spread all over the place can actually be powerful in terms of the learning experience. That they're not simply learning one story. They're bringing their stories really to the table. And so one thing we're focusing on right now is how do we build a curriculum that's online that doesn't simply broadcast from a central hub, but that also brings students and their locales, their cultures, their stories into the classroom, the virtual classroom, and create sort of a sharing that allows us to push and pull on any idea, on any concept that we're working on in a way that's truly global, in a way that's truly inclusive, and in a way that's truly diverse. So I think that as we move forward, we're going to see a multiplicity of opportunities like this. And while the COVID-19 pandemic is a significant challenge for us now, there is a silver lining to all this, where we can perhaps achieve for the first time a more inclusive, more networked modality of global learning that truly leverages what the internet has to offer.